let me introduce my friend Patrisse Cullors, who is an artist, organizer, and freedom fighter right here from Los Angeles. She is the co-founder of Black Lives Matter and founder of Dignity and Power Now. She is also a performance artist, a public speaker, and a New York Times bestselling author. For this book, number 12? Number 12. Patrisse has received many awards for her activism and movement building, including being named by the Los Angeles Times as a civil rights leader for the 21st century, and the Sydney Peace Prize for her work with Black Lives Matter. Patrisse was instrumental in the formation of the Coalition to End Sheriff Violence, which for years advocated for the formation of Los Angeles' first civilian oversight commission over the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, which is now in place, and which is a great feat. Now we just need to make sure they get subpoena power. She continues her work this year in coalition with Justice LA and Reform LA Jails, and currently leading the ballot initiative that we spoke of earlier, and she will go into further detail about that. Personally, I just want to say I've met Patrisse 16 years ago when I first started my career right out of college working for an organization called NCCJ LA, and Patrisse was a youth leader, an advocate, and activist already at that point in time. And so it's just a true honor that our circles keep colliding and that we're part of this movement work together. So without further ado, Patrisse Cullors.
Good morning, All Saints Church. How are we doing? Good morning. This is my second forum here. The first one, I was actually in my first trimester of pregnancy. I think I was keeping it a secret from people, but I was incredibly ill. And it's good. It's good to be out of that storm and now have a 2.5-year-old who is amazing and glorious and makes this work even more urgent. So much of what I want to talk about today is grounding us in this place, Los Angeles County. I grew up here, and my mother, single mother, raised us in Los Angeles, actually in the San Fernando Valley. And for so much of my life, I was very confused and often disturbed by the conditions that my mother and that our family lived in, and that the people in my neighborhood lived in. I didn't understand, while I was being sent off to magnet schools in places like Sherman Oaks and Studio City, why I would come home and see police over-policing in my communities, why I would see the use of over-incarceration in my communities. And as a child, through a child's eyes, all you can understand is maybe this is our fault. Maybe we did something wrong. We didn't do the right things. And I believed that for quite a bit of time in my youth, that maybe my mother didn't work hard enough. Maybe if I do work hard enough, I'll be able to get out of my neighborhood. But it wasn't until I was about 16 years old and ended up going to a social justice high school and learned the language of racism, although I was living the experiences of a racist system, learning the language of sexism and patriarchy and homophobia and transphobia, that I realized, oh, this is a setup. This is not my mother's fault. This is not my father's fault or my fault or our neighborhood's fault. In fact, we didn't create poverty. We were brought into it. And so that type of realization was incredibly expansive and incredibly liberatory for me as a child. I was that child that some would say was defiant. I talked back. That didn't bode well in a black household. But what I knew at a very young age, and what many teachers would tell me is, oh, she's curious, she's bright. And when I learned the language that was given to me by people like Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks, Toni Morrison, these Black women, often queer writers, Alice Walker, who gave me a new understanding of my existence, it allowed for me to paint a different picture. A picture for me that was about, okay, so if this is a setup, that means it can be undone. And if this is a setup, that means that something else could have been in place before this. And so it opened up my curiosity about what was possible. And it's okay. I know. There's always that awkward cell phone. I won't look over there so you don't feel bad. I've been there before. And so I read these books. I was given this opportunity. And I met many folks at what was then a camp called Brotherhood Sisterhood Camp. Sounds very weird, right? Because this camp was a 7-day, where I thought I was going to a camp. Like, you're gonna go and you're gonna go backpack, and I had never been camping before. That's not what poor families do for the most part in the city. You know, it's not like a weekend thing. So yeah, I packed my bags to go camping, and I showed up. And we spent at this camp, it was about 200 children from across LA County, children who were raised in working class, poor communities, children that were raised in affluent communities. And we were put together. And we spent 7 days talking and processing. And we talked about racism, and we processed the impacts racism had on us individually and collectively. And it was this profound experience that would catapult me into my organizing work. And I remember feeling after the second year of being a youth leader that I actually wanted to do more. I was like, okay, great. I know how to have a dialogue about this. I know how to confront this issue. Now, how do I take on the government? Because I know it's the government that is doing this to us, so what's the next step? And as I was maturing, politically maturing, at NCCJ, they opened up their doors to other service organizations and civil rights organizations. And I remember the public library came, and I think, I remember the public library, and I remember this organization called the Bus Riders Union. How many of y'all have heard of the Bus Riders Union? And I wasn't that interested in going to the public library. I mean, I love the library, but I couldn't imagine myself volunteering for the library during the summer. But I was very curious about the organizers in the room who did this quite corny skit, but intriguing nonetheless, about what it looks like to organize somebody on the bus. And I said, they're saying something here. There's something in this. And I went to the workshop. And the first thing I saw was a recording of, at that time, young leaders who were talking about racist government structures. And I was like, that's where I want to be. That's the kind of conversation I want to be having. And I remember going up to them, and I was, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I said, well, do you all take on the police? And they said, no. It's not what we're doing here. We're actually taking on what was then the Metropolitan Transit Agency, the MTA. I said, well, I'll take it. I was so hungry to organize, so hungry to be trained. And I spent 11 years really working on and honing the craft of organizing, because it is a science. Organizers don't wake up one day and know how to organize. We get trained, we develop our skills. And for those 11 years, I learned so much, not just about federal and state, but about this place, Los Angeles County. I learned about the County Board of Supervisors. I learned about our mayors and city council members. I got to have meetings with school board members and appointed officials and have these courageous and powerful conversations with people who are making decisions for me and my family and community members, and often not making the best decisions. I was grateful that I had an organization that had the clarity to fight back. And after those 11 years, I came across the American Civil Liberties Union 86-page complaint against the Sheriff's Department. And it's not every day that a layperson sits and reads a civil rights complaint, but this is how nerdy I am. And any well-trained organizer knows that being read and expert is necessary. But what mostly intrigued me about this complaint is that as I read it, I was reminded of what my family went through. And as I read every prisoner detail their horrific experience inside our county jails, the facility that we pay for through our tax dollars, I was reminded of my 19-year-old brother, Monty Cullors, who was almost killed by the Sheriff's Department in those same jails. I was reminded how not only was he almost killed, but he was, the sheriffs actually lost him. And so for not days or weeks, but literally months, my brother was disappeared in a system where none of us, not even his lawyer, could find him. I'm gonna pause and fast forward. I'll go back to the story, but let's fast forward because our former undersheriff is now sitting in federal prison. Our former sheriff is trying to hide from going to prison. And what we've seen in the last 6 years is the exposing and uncovering of a sheriff's department that didn't just abuse people, but tortured them. Corruption from the top to the bottom. And we lived here. We lived through it. Some of us experienced it firsthand. Some of us had no clue it was happening. But at this point, a decade later, we all know what the Sheriff's Department has done. And so, with my experience with that department and reading that 86-page complaint, I wanted to move to action. As an artist, the first thing I could think about was creating something. I wanted to create a piece, something that could speak to the experience, but also deeply transform what happened to me, my family, and more importantly, my brother. And so I asked the permission of my family. I said, I want to make a piece on this. Here's this complaint. What do you think? And they gave me the blessing. And for about 6 months, I toured a piece called Stained, an intimate portrayal of state violence that gave the artistic viewpoint of what had happened to my family, but something happened. At the end of that 6 months, a good friend of mine came to me and she showed up to the performance. She loved it, and she said, you know, as organizers, we actually have to do more than just make the art around it. What are we gonna do? Because it's happening right now. And I said, I guess I'll make a campaign. And out of this art piece, out of the trauma of my family, Dignity and Power Now and the Coalition to End Sheriff Violence gets created. And I wanna just tease this out a bit because we live in a moment where I know many of you all are here because you're probably already a part of the movement. you do your own work. But it is incredibly important that what we do now makes sense and shapes what happens in the next couple years. My goal is not only to do the local facing work, but my goal is that in 2020, we do not have 45 in office again. Everything that we do in this moment should pave the way so that our families and children can live in a country that's actually safe for them. Amen. And so what I learned 18 years ago, because it's been 18 years that I've known you now. I know. I'm going to be 35 this year. I was 16 when I met you. What I've learned is these last 8 years is that organizing works. And that what we do to lay the path and the foundation to change this place is absolutely critical. It's absolutely critical. And so one of the first campaigns of Dignity and Power Now was actually fighting for civilian oversight of the Sheriff's Department. We were horrified to learn that all these years, our Sheriff's Department had no oversight. And when you would talk to the former sheriff, he would say, yes, we have oversight. The Oversight Commission is called the Independent Commission, Independent Review Commission. And many have asked, well, where is it? And he would say, well, it's right underneath our office at the Sheriff's Department. They shared the same office space. The sheriff was on floor 2, and the Independent Oversight Commission was on floor 1. And so what we learned is that the oversight was a joke, and that it was going to be the work of people that cared about people most marginalized, and most marginalized people that had been impacted by this department, that was going to lead us in this fight. And we brought together faith leaders, churches, educators, teachers, unions, people who are victims of the sheriffs, and we sat in rooms, and we had town halls, and we had petitions. And I remember talking to this reporter from the Daily News. Hopefully at some point she'll remember that I said this. But I went up to her and she was asking me a question, what do you all want? I said, well, it's easy. We want independent oversight of the Sheriff's Department. And she laughed at me. And she said, you're never gonna get that. And at the end of 2014, 2 years after organizing, we won civilian oversight of the Sheriff's Department. And that commission, we called for it to have legal powers, to have all the teeth. But the County Board of Supervisors declined. And so while we have this amazing commission, it has no legal powers. And so the petition, and whoever has petitions in your hand, raise them. Yes. The petition that you're signing today, and raise your hand if you've already signed it. That's half. Let's get most of the room if you're a LA County registered voter. The petition that you're signing today is what we've been dreaming up since we started our campaign. This, if passed and gets on the ballot, would do 3 things. It would give this Civilian Oversight Commission subpoena power. The power to subpoena documents from the Sheriff's Department, the power to subpoena officers, and also the power to investigate. So right now it has no investigatory power. So if something happens, if a family member says my loved one was killed, they don't have the right. They don't have the legal power to look into it. So it would give this commission unfettered access to a department who has had decades of corruption. And you would think that our Sheriff McDonald, would be excited about it, would say, yes, I welcome this. And in some parts, he welcomes the commission, but he welcomes it without power. And his response has been, that's my job and my duty, which we agree, but it shouldn't be his sole job and sole duty. The people of Los Angeles should be able to have a commission that represents us and doesn't have to be loyal to the department, which he does, which makes sense. That's his job. And so this commission would have those two powers. Number 3, we have spent the last 7 years, and when I say we, I mean the people of Los Angeles, groups like LA No More Jails, groups like Justice LA, Dignity and Power Now, and Black Lives Matter, trying to fight the building of a $3.5 billion jail. This would be the most expensive jail facility if we allow it to go forward. It's the building of not just one jail, but 2 new jails. Not because we need them necessarily. Jail number 1 would be a mental health jail. Do you all hear that? Can you believe we're putting those 3 words together in 2018? A mental health jail? Do you believe that mental illness is a crime? Well, our county board of supervisors do. And they're willing to invest billions of dollars into incarcerating people who actually need support, dignity, and care. The second jail would be a women's jail. And they're calling it a women's village. And they're saying that women could take their children to jail with them. This sounds like a horror film to me. How many people, I was just gonna say, how many people are watching Handmaid's Tale? And so this women's jail, and let me just make this clear to you, women's population, 70% of the women who are in jail are nonviolent. Majority of the women in those jails are mothers. Majority of those women in jails are dealing with serious mental illness and addiction. And many of the women in those jails are in those jails for defending themselves against their abusive partners. Once again, these are not crimes. These are social ills that should be dealt with in creative, responsive, and healthy ways. And so this initiative, if we get it on the ballot, would give the commission that we fought so hard for the power to really create an alternatives to incarceration plan. We've been begging the County Board of Supervisors for nearly a decade to create a plan. They have never done any extensive study on who's inside those jails. They've never created and developed a plan to design, what happens when we have the cycle of incarceration from people who are living in Skid Row and ending up in Twin Towers, back on Skid Row and in Twin Towers again. They've never developed an innovative and creative plan, and so this would create that. We are in a moment where we get to change this county's destiny. Any jail that's being built in 10 to 15 years from now is being built for my child. Yes. We've asked the County Board of Supervisors, how come you're not willing to pause on jail expansion and think about where we can put $3.5 billion? Employment, There are so many options that actually look at human beings and their lives. They haven't given us a clear answer, and so we stopped waiting for them. We stopped waiting for them, and we developed the Reform LA Jails Initiative. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be people power that changes this place. We can't wait all day for elected officials, especially when they're not doing it for us. We have to show up. We have to make the change. I'm so grateful to always be invited back here. This is one of my favorite church communities. It is. I have another favorite church community in St. Louis, the St. John's folks. And I'm grateful that this audience and that all of you have been so present over the last years for the work, the grassroots labor of people who are not just changing things for those most directly impacted, but we really and truly believe we are changing things for LA County. And when LA County changes, the country changes. And when the country changes, the world changes. Thank you very much.
We're going to open it up to questions, and I want to encourage you to do your best to ask a question. And we've got some mics floating around, so does anyone want to ask Patrisse something? Right up here in the front.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I'm a California peace officer, and I came in by the back door as a park ranger. And I've spent my career praying about how to do it, the job, humanely.
Yeah.
I can see that people in the field on the front lines are so frustrated, and I can see how this whole, because I work as a county worker now, there's not a big vision. So, I've been attacked physically by mentally ill people, and he needed help. But the response is to put them in jail.
Yeah.
So, and I think there's people who think that this facility is more humane than the jail. But I know that we need to think bigger than that. And I guess a few more ideas, specifics that you might be able to give me. Yeah.
Great question.
Thank you.
So you're absolutely right. The way this conversation about the mental health jail has been, it's going to be a more humane facility. And I want to give a little bit of perspective. In the early 90s, and I came across an article LA Times wrote, the then County Board of Supervisors were lobbying for a new mental health jail. That mental health jail was called Twin Towers. And that's the same place where my brother was tortured. And many other people with mental illness say that it is one of the worst facilities they've ever been to. And so the rhetoric, I think it's important that we kind of cut through the rhetoric. A jail is a jail. And what we need, and we've had these conversations because LA County is huge. We need a number of things. We need new ideas about how we serve a population of people who suffer from severe mental illness. What we know is that cycling people with mental illness in and out of jail and incarceration exacerbates their mental illness. What we also know is that if you didn't go into jail with a mental illness, you might leave one with one. So the question becomes, how are we treating one another? And what kinds of places, not just facilities, but what kind of county do we need to live in that honors people who are sometimes just dealing with a one-time experience and sometimes dealing with acute mental illness? One way is to fully fund the Sober Living Home Network. It's a network of, right now, private sober living homes around LA County, but they're very rarely given money by the state or the federal government. But imagine if we created a better model around the sober living home network. That's one option. Many people with mental illness are in sober living homes. My brother is in one. Another option is actually creating more mental health care facilities. We have to remember, we did live in a time when there were mental health care facilities, and then Reagan got rid of them. And so we're actually dealing with the consequences of administration that existed decades ago. My biggest pressure to us is let's make sure we don't make the same mistake now. What Reform LA Jails and many other organizations are trying to do is have foresight. If we end up building these jails, what the impact it's going to have 40, 50 years from now for LA. And if we give precedent to the County Board of Supervisors and just say yes to this $3.5 billion jail, I promise it won't stop here. I promise it won't. And so we have to have these types of courageous conversations where we're thinking about what works in other places. We're the largest jailer in the world. That means that other places are doing something different. And what are they doing? And I think we should be curious. We should be curious, we should be asking questions, we should be having conversations.
One right here, right here, and then Katie, there's a question over here.
Hey, take the mic, please.
Please use the microphone.
Could you talk a little bit about this independent commission, how it functions,
Yes.
how it gets appointed,
Yes.
who can remove it, how effective, et cetera? And then tell us who you're voting for a sheriff?
Yeah. So one thing I'll ask this crowd to do is on dignityandpowernow.org's website, we have a report we made, and we teamed up with the UCLA Human Rights Clinic, and we did a year-long study of civilian oversight bodies across the country. We took the best models, and we said, this is what we think LA County needs. We lobbied it to the County Board of Supervisors. We went across the county, getting feedback, and then we signed off on it. And for the most part, our civilian oversight document was implemented. So it's a 9-member board. 5 of them are appointed by the County Board of Supervisors. The other 4 are appointed by community. There's an interviewing process. And I think there's 1 seat up in June. So look at the County Board of Supervisors site and apply if you want to sit on the commission. Up to date, it's been active for about a year. And it's been incredibly important and moralizing for our community. But we know that it only has a limited amount of time while not having any legal powers. That it will turn into one of those commissions that can say whatever it says, make whatever recommendations, and not be heard or not pressure the sheriffs. So and for me, the legal power, the subpoena power and investigative power is still not enough. That's just the first steps. I ultimately want this body to have disciplinary power. So what this initiative would do, it would actually change the county constitution. Right now, our county charter, all the legal powers and that exist for the sheriff's department that could impact any deputy or sheriff deputy lives with the sheriff itself. So this would change our county constitution. We did a similar thing with the Christopher Commission with LAPD. We changed the city county charter so that the LAPD Commission could have a significant amount of legal powers. It doesn't always practice it well, and I think this is always the tension with government bodies. Right now, it's practicing it well, it's Civil Oversight Commission, but can always be co-opted, and I think we have to stay vigilant. I'm not sure who I'm voting for sheriff yet. I know it's Sunday. But I have a lot of complaints with Sheriff McDonnell. He made a lot of promises. I think he's doing some interesting work specifically around the 300 problematic deputies. But at the end of the day, he has not been that accessible to community, and he's really isolated himself. And so I am not sure who I'm voting for.
Yeah. You were talking about the supervisors. My supervisor is on the ballot Tuesday in a primary. Are any of the supervisors supportive?
Good question. Of this, so who's your supervisor? Is it Barger or is it?
Supervisor? Yes, mine is Sheila Kuehl.
Okay, so Cullors on the, so she'll get in. So I've met with every supervisor except for Catherine Barger. That's how you pronounce her last name. I don't think she likes us very much. It's fine. But the other supervisors have been interesting in this conversation. They have, the only supervisor who didn't vote for the passing of a $3.5 billion jail was Solis. Every other supervisor voted to pass it. When it comes to subpoena power and investigative power, I don't know where they stand. They haven't contacted us. I think they're trying to wait to see if we get on the ballot to have those conversations. The most helpful office right now has been Supervisor Hilda Solis's office. Supervisor Hilda Solis's office has been the most helpful. I've sat with Cullors. I think it's worth, if you know her or if she's your supervisor, to give her a call and ask her where she stands. And I think it's necessary. We're not actively calling supervisors right now, but if you have relationships or if that's kind of the activism you like to do, I encourage you to call your supervisor and ask them why would they be putting $3.5 billion towards jailing.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome. It's so good to see you. My question is related to what's going on in some other parts of the country.
Oh.
I recently, you're probably familiar with, and I'm blanking on his name, anyway, never mind. You know what I'm talking about? No. He has a show called something about problems. And a lot of what he deals with is issues around the country, particularly related to police and to race and those types of things. Anyway, Seattle and Washington State seems to be in a mindset of realizing that something has to be done.
Yeah.
And they also seem to be in a mindset of experimenting and exploring. So I was just wondering whether there's dialogue there or any other places where this is happening. Thanks.
Yeah, I've been working with folks in Seattle and Washington for a while. They're also trying to change their Peace Officer Bill of Rights. And they are gathering signatures right now. I don't know for sure if they've collected all of them, but I've been in conversation with people on the ground and doing amazing work. And after Charlena Lyles was killed up there, they asked me to come up, and I met with folks and spoke at a rally. And Michael Bennett, before he was traded to the Philadelphia Eagles, sorry guys, I don't know football, he had been doing incredible work with the families in Seattle. Really great community.
Hi, thank you so much. I just wanted to ask you if you could tell us the percentage, racially, of the people who are incarcerated, so people could kind of put a number to what's going on.
80% of the people who are incarcerated in LA County jails are Black or Latino. And both groups disproportionately represented by their population in LA County. Yeah. And I think it's a very important, it's a civil rights and human rights travesty. And I think it's 47% of Black people inside LA County jails suffer from severe mental illness. Those are numbers that we were able to get through another report we did, documenting severe mental illness and the impact it has on Black people inside LA County jails, we created a report with the UCLA Human Rights Clinic, and we recognized that Black people with mental illness were also even more overly represented inside the LA County jails. They're the first to be incarcerated, the first to be criminalized, the first to be seen as only drug users or addicted versus having a dual diagnosis. And very rarely are they treated. And so that was a huge marker for us as well.
So one more question, if we have time, if anyone has one.
Hi, hello. I just want to make a statement. I love your presentation. It was really great. And you're correct. There's a problem with the sheriff's department. Those sheriff's personnel are more inhuman than the people that they bring in. So you got a problem right with that. They do have a problem with the LA County Sheriff. They really do. Thank you.
So that brings us to a close. I want to encourage you again, if you have not signed the petition, please do so. Lauren and Suzanne, are you still in the room, walking around with clipboards? In the back? Please be sure they're also available at the action table. So if you don't get the petition here in this room, please go out on the lawn at our action table and sign that petition if you are a registered voter living in Los Angeles County. Also, do not miss the opportunity to purchase Patrisse's book. She signed them. They're available for purchase over here with Christina. And also, if you would like more information about Patrisse's work in this ballot initiative, please get in touch with our social media accounts. Susan is reposting everything right now, so you can access all of Patrisse's efforts through our website as well. With that, I want to thank you again, Patrisse, for being with us. Thank you all.